Hello, everyone.
Hello.
And hi, Komal. Welcome, everybody, to this ASME bite-size session. And today we're talking about social media and professional identity. My name is Dr. Jonny Guckian. I am the Director for Social Media and Communications at ASME. And today I have a very special guest, who is Komal Atta. And she is the Assistant Director of Health Professions Education and Senior Coordinator of the School of Optometry at the University of Faisalabad. And she is a colleague of mine who's really interested in social media, just like I am. And I always love hearing her speak about social media and reading her work on social media. So I'm really excited to hear about your thoughts on professional identity today.
Thank you so much, Jonny. Thank you for the lovely introduction. Hello, everybody. I hope you're all having a good day. So today we're going to, as Jonny introduced, we're going to talk about social media. I should be sharing my screen now so that we start. So basically, this is the roadmap of how we're going to go about it. We're going to be discussing a few introductory things about professional identities, communities of practice, and how social media is factoring into all of it now, particularly after the COVID-19 situation. Then we're going to be discussing some things out of a little research that I just did. We're in the phase of, we're in the second phase actually now. So we'll be sharing some of the things about how worldwide practices regarding social media are shaping professional identity. Then we'll be discussing about the problems that we are facing with social media and solutions and best practices. And after that, the forum is open for engagement. You can ask questions, you can comment, you can debate as much as you like. So starting off, as you all know that we all being health professional educators, physicians, clinicians, we have certain communities of practice which we've been working with, which we have been part of, and which have helped us grow throughout our time. Now, with the advent of social media, particularly with the advent of COVID-19, our communities of practice have become more global. So once you log on to social media, your community of practice is the whole world, basically. So that kind of influences your professional identity in a rather different way. So that's what we're going to be discussing. So this is something I took out of an article by Yvonne Stennert and her colleagues, that professional identity is basically a representation of yourself, which is achieved through different stages, values, and norms of the medical profession, which you internalize with time. And this results in an individual thinking, acting, and feeling like a physician. So basically, the end point is that these are the things you do, or you subconsciously take, or you consciously behave to actually become the doctor you want to become. Now, there are two steps in professional identity formation. The first is at your individual level, which involves the psychological development and the growth of a person. Lynn Monroe says that this starts even much before you actually join the medical profession. So this is how you're shaping your society or your friends or your culture, shaping your opinions from the beginning of your education. Now, the second point is which we're going to be more focusing on today. That is the collective level, which involves socialization of a person into appropriate roles and forms of participation in the community's work. Now, when it comes to social media, this socialization has taken a whole new world meaning to it. So this socialization is now very global. It's very, very public. It's something which people can see, they can judge, they can actually internalize. So professional identity formation has a digital component, which is very, very much influenced by social media, that is Twitter or Facebook or Instagram or WhatsApp. So that's why it's very important to understand how emerging doctors and medical students will actually be factoring into this new professional identity. That is your social media professional identity. So we started off, I did a small open-ended survey, which because it was open-ended, I wasn't expecting a big response, but we have a huge response. We have about 200 people from around the world who actually responded to us. We're in the second phase, so it's not published as yet. We found out that the most commonly used social media platforms, they vary a little bit in the East and the West. In Asian nations, we mostly are using Facebook, which is followed by WhatsApp and then Twitter. This is for professional social media usage. In the West, Twitter is more popular as compared to Facebook for professional social media usage. And podcasts are very popular, like the one by HMI, the Lime podcast, or like ASME Bitesize. These are still not a very big norm in Asia, but we follow some of the big ones. However, I think that this is very important and we need to actually indulge more in podcasts and webinars and things like this. So these are just some of the uses in MedEd of social media that so far people have been using it for. I'm not going to go into much detail because I have referenced a lot of links. You can actually go into detail for that, seeing what all is being done. Obviously, it's for information sharing. It's for getting inspiration from your favorite bloggers or from your ideal practitioners or from your favorite educationists. It's a source of clinical case discussion where you can actually share with each other about unique findings, where you can talk about difficulties that you face. It's obviously a big platform for mentorship. You can find people who can help you and inspire you from the same field or the same discipline. And it's huge now in research promotion. I would like to give a shout out to Dr. Tony Artino over here because he has an article called To Tweet or Not to Tweet. And I didn't know that it had that name when I submitted this bite size. And I found that out later on. So the name is actually not inspired from there, but yeah, it happens to be the same. So in his article, he says that tweeting about your research actually helped in its promotion and dissemination. So that's a big benefit of social media in medical education as well. Now, these are just some of the things that we are discussing, which take place and for which we've used social media. So how does it factor in your professional identity? The first thing is that when you're on a platform where you have like-minded people or where you have an audience, the information dissemination is very fast. So you can reach a lot of people throughout the world very easily. So it's a big, it's like your own branding. So you can advertise yourself, your work, and the positive things you do in a very, very good way. It promotes a lot of diversity because you can reach out to other people who are from other nationalities, other ethnicities, other schools of thought. It's a safer platform to engage with many, many different people. Then it's coming up as a big ground for mentoring and coaching. You can talk to different people from different parts of the world who you think happen to be working on a specific project that you're interested in or something that you want to do with. Then there's a lot of networking, like me and Johnny, we met over Twitter and we've been working together on a very big project. So it's very exciting. So it's been one of the pros of social media. Now, moving on to the problems that we are facing, the things which hinder professional identity formation. The first thing is that there have been reports of cyberbullying. In the survey that I did, there's a lot of problems faced by junior doctors as well as by female doctors all over the world with cyberbullying. There's a lot of them reported harassment. A lot of them reported that they did not want to participate in professional platforms and social media because they thought that they would be ridiculed or they would be thought of as too junior, or the females they said that they had a lot of inappropriate comments coming up in the DM. There was a lot of harassment coming up. So that's actually hindering their professional identity formation online. So, which is a bad thing because if you have some good research or you have something good going on as a doctor, so you should have the right to actually disseminate it. So we'll be discussing shortly how to deal with that. The second problem, which is faced by a lot of people, is that social media is like a society. It's like a social platform. So it's a environment in itself where you're actually having a lot of people with a lot of different opinions about everything under the sun. So generally, you're interested in not just completely medical talk, but you have interests, you have ideas. There's a lot of personal and medical mixing going on over here. So there's a lot of blurring of the boundaries. So that's something a lot of people have had issues with, about the blurring of the private and the public persona, or about the blurring of the professional and the private identity. So that's just because it's a big place, it's a big platform, and you have, a lot of things have a lot of opinions and people do get involved in stuff. Another big problem, which you have noticed with the COVID-19, as well as you might have noticed with the United States elections just frequently, is that a lot of fake news, a lot of fake things have been coming up on the social media. There have been a lot of fake facts. Unfortunately, during the COVID pandemic, you've noticed that a lot of the information there is not genuine. And it sometimes becomes very hard to discern what's right and what's wrong. And that also does affect your professional identity, because if you're tweeting or you're sharing something and you're not sure about the authenticity of that post, so that does reflect. Another thing which I noticed is it's quite interesting that this is not a big issue in most of the Western nations. I interviewed people from the UK, and I got responses from a lot of European countries. I got responses from the US. So they don't usually have this problem of people practicing medicine on social media, but it is an issue in the Middle East, in most Asian countries, particularly in Pakistan, in Bangladesh. I even had some reports from Malaysia that people are actually dispensing medical advice over social media, which is not very safe in the first place. And secondly, it has a lot of legal complications, and it's not something that should be done to a live patient. So again, that's affecting your professional identity formation as a physician. If you're dispensing medical prescriptions or medical advice online, and then if they go wrong, so that could actually get bad. So Johnny, would you like to join in or comment on something? You're mute.
I'm on mute. What kind of host am I? I just saw one of the questions from the audience, which asked regarding requesting more light on female harassment issues in the Western setup. I think it's a good question, because Kamal, you demonstrate some really nice, on your bike to demonstrate even more nice kind of cultural differentiation between different parts of the world. And I was just reading about a study kind of in response to your question, and there was a study in 2015 which it was in the States, and suggested about 20% of women in their study had received some form of obscene message, and that's the people involved in education. And I think that's probably underreporting the numbers, if I'm being cynical about that. I don't know what your thoughts on that would be, Kamal.
Yes, I think it's underreported. I think one of the things I would recommend for them is if you go on Twitter and you can follow Simon Fleming, he has a lot of work on this, and he's also doing some continuous work on it about harassment. So you'll see that there are a lot of cases. Secondly, I've noticed it happening in so many places. People have now started to name and shame. So you will see that there are so many cases of social media bullying, particularly with females who have inappropriate messages coming in their DMs or underneath their comments on Facebook. I have a colleague who she received a very inappropriate DM. It was a video, and it was after some comment she made on somebody's Twitter. So these things do happen, and yes, there's a lot of shame associated to it. So it is underreported generally, and particularly in Asian countries, because females here, they're not as vocal about these things. So harassment does go under the radar sometimes. But yes, even in the West, it is quite underreported. So that's why all these movements about naming and shaming, about hammering it out, about he for she, they're all gathering momentum now, because it does exist.
Yeah, and I mean, just looking at Simon's the work that Simon pointed out, he's on at OrthopodReg on Twitter.
Yeah.
From a survey of 186 respondents, 59.1% had experienced some sexually implicit or offensive jokes. Now, this isn't exclusive to social media, but there is a significant aspect of social media which empowers people to be able to talk in that way and to offend in that way, and possibly because it depersonalizes a lot of things. Yeah,
actually, when I was surveying, so when I followed up with the interviews, I did ask a few women that why do they actually said something very interesting, that on social media, it's very easy to stay anonymous, or it's very easy to, harass somebody from a distance. So there are people who are more predatory on social media. This is something which is, it is a con, or it's a bad drop for social media, but there are people who have indulged in this practice because it becomes much more easier to get unidentifiable. There are people who have made accounts not by their real names. They have used names of other physicians at times. So these things have happened.
Yeah. And I think that there are also equally, there's a lot of people now, as we pointed out correctly, there are a lot of people out there who are fighting against it and have actually made it part of their professional identity to seek this kind of negative behaviors out and fight against it publicly and act as role models and leaders. So that's quite a powerful process.
Exactly. So that's like we were going to come up to that in the later slides, but that's like a very big plus point and a very big positive movement on social media, that there are a lot of heroes there, if you would like to say, and sheroes, who are actually advocating these things. So they're like really working for making it a more safe and more positive environment. Okay. So moving on to the cultural aspects. So basically, a lot of social media practices have been dictated by culture. I was doing my survey and I found out that there's a difference between the US and the UK system of training induction. And in the US, a lot of people who were expecting to get residency, they actually do believe that social media is one of the factors in their resume. So they tend to restrict their social media more, or change their names, or as some of them said, tend to clean up their social media more before residency, because it may factor in their programs. I did not find much literature on this, but this is something that residents have reported. In parts of Asian countries, there's a lot of difference regarding networking, particularly in the clinical side. People, because there's a gap between a teacher and a student, so that gap also exists between a supervisor and a trainee. So most clinical trainees, say in Pakistan or Bangladesh, or even in India, Malaysia, Iran, they reported that if they would add their supervisor on social media, they would be very, very careful about it. And they would ideally not add them, or if they would add them, so it would be a very different sort of, they would keep it very restricted out of fear that they might say something which would offend them. That does not appear to be the case in the US or the UK, where most of the people have added their supervisors and they're on pretty cordial terms with them. So that's just a big cultural difference. Then there are other cultural differences going on, like social media is used for teaching in almost all parts of the world, which is good. But there are certain qualms in some parts of Pakistan. For example, some of my own students, they don't use social media because there is a sort of negativity associated with it in some factions over here, that it's not a good thing to do. It leads to negative thoughts. It leads to bad things. It leads to harassment. So there are people who actually discourage it completely. So that hinders in teaching and learning activities on social media in this part of the world. However, that doesn't seem to be the case in a lot of other places. They're progressing in this sense. Then other cultural differences that I saw during reading up on things and on my study, on my own study, were that people have a lot of communities of practice everywhere on social media, like from all over the world. They have communities of practice, they're diverse, and they're sharing things. However, some parts of the world are actually promoting a lot of telemedicine and a lot of sharing of patient cases on social media. And I think that's basically places where they don't have a lot of set guidelines about residents sharing information or doctors sharing information on social media. Like I know Australia, the UK, the US, they have set guidelines about what their residents are expected to share on social media. That's not the case with a lot of countries like Egypt or UAE or Pakistan. So you will be having more information which may lead to a risk of breaching confidentiality on social media. Also, I think there's a trend of telemedicine on social media in some parts of the world. And that's very, very common in the Middle East. I've noticed it's also quite common in the Southeast of Asia and from some parts of Africa. And I guess that stems from the fact that it's a free platform. So they think it's more convenient to use it for telemedicine, but it's not a practice, I think, that should be carried on. So anything you want to say, Johnny?
No, I just think it's important to differentiate between telemedicine, which can be quite powerful in my specialty, dermatology, which has revolutionized quite a lot of work, particularly during the pandemic, and added a lot of things, with appropriate use with social media. So like you have one hand, which is appropriate systems and referrals from a general practitioner to a dermatology specialist service. On the other hand, you have what I get 2 to 3 times a week, which is an Instagram message saying, "Oh, can you look at my grand's rash?" Those are two very different things. So your professional boundaries and your professional identity absolutely are key there, because in one hand you are using professional systems, professional pathways. On the other hand, I'm sat there, at home watching a film, eating a bag of crisps, and I'm just Johnny, not the dermatologist. So it's really difficult because as I think as somebody who has commented earlier, there is a massive blurred boundary social media.
Exactly.
Who are you at that time? Are you the doctor or are you the mate?
Yeah, exactly. And that's also a thing with adding your patients on social media. There's also a thing over there that, there's blurred boundaries. And then, there are places where there are few people and then they all know each other and then they become a patient someday. So those things, they're actually, these are the blurry points in your professional identity.
It's almost like an extreme expansion of that old classic Little England's rural GP who knows everybody in their village.
Exactly.
And that is held up often as the quintessential example of what general practice is. But actually, you expand that exponentially, and you get social media, which is probably in practice not all that necessarily professional.
Yeah, exactly.
Sorry, Kamal, we do have another question. Just professional identity formation of a health professional or any other is a continuity of an expansion of professional identity. Do you think there's more of professional identity formation of individuals first through social media, and then it leads to professional identity formation?
Yes, I think all professional identity formation, like I cited in the beginning, I've added the Lynn Monroe article in the references also. It starts from the beginning. It starts from when you're very little. So even on social media, the survey I did, I found out that most of the people who are using social media for medical education right now are between the age groups of 30 to 45. So that's basically the age group of young residents and like slightly senior people. Not a lot of medical students are going on social media for medical educational purposes. So, but as you know, that most medical students right now, they're all digital natives. So they've all been born and they're growing up with social media. So they have their opinions and they've seen it. And obviously they have an identity there. But I think it's on us to actually introduce somewhat social media etiquette to them so that they can evolve a professional identity from there as well. And the best way to do that is, I think it's role modeling. If you're on social media, so you develop practices which your students will eventually see, it gets around, they know you're there. So they are going to, if you don't add them, they're going to just look at your profile anyways. So, it's going to be a factor. So the best thing to do is to actually be positive and role model as much as you can and network as much as you can so that they can see how it's used for furthering their professional identity. Okay.
Should we hear about the cultural aspects?
Yeah. So I was talking about how different cultures, they govern social media in different places and how it's very important for developing your professional identity to remember that context and culture will factor. So for example, if I'm practicing in Pakistan, I have to know that there are certain things which will be inappropriate culturally over here, which might be acceptable in, say, China or maybe in the US. So developing my professional identity, I will have to filter out and be aware of the things that my population, my students, and my colleagues are more willingly going to hear. Instead of just putting out things which are from other places, I have to put them in context. So I think that's something which has been done really well by a lot of places. Like I've talked to people from Malaysia who have very much internalized things into their own culture. Pakistan is doing a good job with that. The UAE does a very good job. They've taken all, particularly in dermatology, they've taken all the teachings and everything, and they try to put it on their own population, and then they try to propagate it on social media as such. So I think it's very important, and most of the people were aware of this fact that the cultural part is very, very important. So moving forward. Yes, like I briefly touched upon before, there are hierarchical aspects in your professional identity development. A lot of people were reluctant, particularly in Asian countries, to add their boss or their teacher or their supervisors on social media. This was not the case in medical education or in basic sciences, from where I basically belong. But in the clinical side, it was quite reported. And even students from the US were reluctant to add supervisors or program managers onto their social media, a fear of being judged. So there is a hierarchy that is existing there, and it's something which needs to be decreased for proper professional identity formation, because wherever your professional identity is factoring, whether it's on social media or it's in real life, you do need to interact with all sorts of individuals. So I think this is something that the more senior lot or supervisors or program directors, they also need to factor into this, that if they have students on social media, they should try to be more welcoming, more warm, and ease in their fears, be less judgmental. And same goes for the younger trainees and the students, that they have to have an open heart and not fear and not be very judgmental if there's a senior person or somebody who's not that well versed in the social media lingo or in the social media universe that they're from. So I think it has to factor both ways. Otherwise, it's going to be an impediment in their professional growth. Okay, moving on to things that have come up on social media, things which have gone wrong first. So this is an abstract from the Journal of Vascular Surgery. It has recently become very famous. So basically, this is about the Bikini Movement, which most of you might be aware of. For those who are not aware of it, this basically focused on, there were a lot of issues with the ethical consent first, because what they did was that they took up 235 publicly identifiable social media accounts of vascular surgeons, and they identified potentially unprofessional and unprofessional content, out of which some of the things were just those people being normal people. So that's where the whole Bikini movement started, and social media played a huge role in it, that you can't actually expect a doctor to just become a white coat for the whole of the time they are on social media. So social media, like most of the people in the chat are also discussing, and how we've also pointed out, there are some blurred outlines. So there are people who have, they have their own identity. And it's good to remember that professional identity has a strong personal component. So if somebody chooses to wear a bikini and they have a picture, doesn't mean that they're going to be a bad surgeon. This is one of the classical examples of how something that had gone wrong was taken up in social media, a discriminatory point, and how the Bikini movement, it gained a huge, it was a huge stance, and how later the Journal of Vascular Surgery also issued a reply and an apology, and they amended the whole article. So, Johnny, do you want to say something before we move ahead?
Yeah, I would say it's more infamous than famous, really, and it's not been fully retracted. Yeah. I think there needs to be a wider discussion, really, about professionalism in social media, and I know it's outside the scope of this talk, but there's some relation to it in that.
Yes.
One of my colleagues, Elliot, who will love that I'm giving him a shout out, because he's in this chat. We worked together on a recent systematic review on social media, and we found actually quite a few other articles similar to this that exist out there. There's not quite to the degree of shaming as the Bikini sort of thing, but I think the whole idea of a subjective judgment of professionalism by educators is very morally dubious and quite difficult. And whilst there is GMC standards on professionalism, there is not, the evidence would suggest from our systematic review that there's not a great deal of consensus regarding that on behalf of educators, on behalf of clinicians or students. So I think there needs to be a lot of work done in the future regarding professionalism, and that educators and researchers and doctors all need to bear their own professionalism in mind when undertaking investigations of professionalism.
Yes, I totally agree. I think this is one of the, this is actually a big example, but you are right. It exists throughout. There are other articles. And I think professionalism is something which needs to be formalized into the curriculum. It needs to be internalized from a very starting point of medical school. And it needs to have open discussions, and particularly professionalism related to social media. I think we need to have this talk with our students and our graduates, and obviously at upper levels as well, like the physicians, doctors, they themselves have to engage in more discussion, more open debate about this, that what do they think is professional on social media. You can't really expect a person to not have any individual life at all to be called a professional. So yeah, this warrants a very big discussion, and it's not really part of this topic, but it is completely related to professional identity. So I think that it's important to remember that your professional identity does have two components, and you have to balance between both of them. It's not just going to be about how much of a surgeon you look like. You have to balance a private and a professional life, and you have to, model that balance in front of others so that such things don't keep on coming up. We can take a question. I see the blinking.
Just the last question is that their articles had its negative effects on doctors' use of social media, and I think that we have to bear this stuff in mind, because you see negative use of social media all the time, and you see people expressing bad professionalism a lot in various different aspects, and I think that does put people off social media. And I always want to try to get the message across that please don't undo the good work that the overwhelming amount of good work that's out there in social media. There is bad, as Komal has really eloquently described, but there is a lot of good. So I think we should bear in mind and be careful about the badness and unprofessionalism and the stuff that can impact professional identity negatively, but also emphasize the good things too.
Yeah, exactly. I think, I think it's very, very important that we need to, first of all, recognize that social media is now essential. It's an essential for positive change. So it's something which has revolutionized the world. It is something which is now revolutionizing medical education. And it's something which is going to be staying there. So we need to accept it, and we need to use it as positively as possible. It's done wonders. And with every good thing, there is a little bit of bad, but you have to realize that with every movement, this should be, it will decrease with time, and you have to be conscious about that. So moving on to the do's that we think you should do on social media for your professional identity formation, the things which will help. First of all, develop a code of conduct. So a code of conduct, like I mentioned before, in some parts of the world, you have set code of conducts for residents, but it's good to develop your own code of conduct, develop a personal code of conduct about how you want your social media to factor in your professional life, to what extent you are willing to share information, how professional you will be, what aspects of your personal life you are comfortable with sharing, what aspects of your professional life you're comfortable with sharing, how much of trust you think you can garner. So this is something which is going to vary for every individual. It's not going to be the same for me and Johnny. It's not going to be the same for other people. So this is something you have to make for yourself. Secondly, when you're on social media, we all are basically agents of change, because we're talking to a universal audience. We're talking to students. We're talking to potential people who will want to come into the medical field. We're talking to senior doctors or people who might just change by something we say. So always promote equality, inclusion, and diversity. This is what we were discussing before, that some fantastic work has been done, and it's being carried on by the Black Lives Matter movement, the Hammer It Out movement, he for she. All of these are very, very pertinent here. So if you are on social media, use it as a positive change agent and promote equality, inclusion, and diversity. Then one of the very key, very important things here is share responsibly. If you want to share something, unless and until you're sure that it comes from a very credible source or something that you will personally endorse, something that you can debate about why you shared it, don't do it. If you can actually answer to why you shared it, it's credible, or it's something you can own, only then share. Otherwise, don't randomly share information that you find on the internet or on social media, because it's a social platform. It's like something you're hearing in you're hearing in a gathering or in a party. So you can't actually go on sharing it around irresponsibly. So you have to make sure that what you're sharing is, to some extent, it's authentic. Then you have to own it. So this is very important. This is something which comes in most social media debate. If you have shared something, or if you have written something, or if you are participating in something, you are solely responsible for that. So make sure that what you are liking, what you are participating in, what you are sharing, you share those opinions and those thoughts, and you will endorse it if it happens to you, or if it's something in which you are going to function or factor. Otherwise, don't go for it. If you cannot own it, then do not be a part of such conversations. So, and this goes for everybody. This has to be on a very personal level. Like, I might actually like a page on cats, and because I think they're adorable. But somebody who doesn't like cats, or who doesn't know much about cats, or who doesn't want to, and then he shares one or two things about cats and says, "Oh, I just did that anyway." That's irresponsible, because people will judge you for what you have put on your profiles or on your pages. So to develop a strong professional identity, you have to own what you write or what you share. Okay, so it's good to create some separation and some. So that means you have to create, like, you can distinguish between your private and professional social media. One way of doing that is you can use different platforms. Like if you have very informal, completely private people you want to engage on social media by sharing your personal information, your pictures, your videos, whatever, you may use that on a separate platform from the platform you choose for a public profile. So like I generally do not put a lot of private information on Twitter. I do sometimes, but not to a very huge extent. I use it as a professional social media. And I use my Instagram as the most private one. I don't have a lot of people who I don't know added on my Instagram, who I don't know personally. So that's one of the ways in which people who find it difficult to distinguish between their public and private lives, they could use it like that. Otherwise, there are always privacy settings, which comes to the next thing, that know your platform. So when you're using something professionally for your professional identity, know the nuances of that platform, know the glitches of your platform, know how to set privacy, how to make a post public, how to block somebody, how to report somebody, know all those things. So this will actually facilitate you in whatever way you are planning on developing your identity, or whatever way you're planning on indulging in discussions with people. For example, Facebook, you have to know how to operate it properly. It's one of those interfaces which keeps on changing face every few weeks. So you have to know how to use it, how to block, how to, there are different restrictions for different people there. There's a lot of ways to share. And always remember one thing about social media, this is like a rule of the thumb, that nothing is private here. So there is no privacy. No matter what they're saying, it's not really private. So just don't share anything which you're going to regret later. So there's something Simon always says, that don't share anything you don't want to show your mom. So yeah, that's one of those things that you have to keep in mind, that there is no privacy. People will get around to what you share. So be very, very responsible about it. It's good to have some legal awareness about, this is especially in regards to cyberbullying. You should know about the ways in which you can report cyberbullying, and you can make your social media experience more comfortable and more helpful. For example, in my country, there's the FIA. It has a cyberbullying unit. So if somebody is getting bullied on Facebook or Twitter or on WhatsApp, they can actually report there. And if that's a Pakistani citizen who's bullying them, they can be tracked down from their IP, and they can be called out for it. There are different punishments of different levels of harassment. So that's one of the things that people need to be aware of when they're using social media. If they think that the problem is getting very serious, they need to know where to go, what authorities to address. And if, for example, you don't have any such rules, or you don't think there's anything, you can always name and shame, because now there's a huge community which will come out to support you. That's the beauty of social media, that you have so many people who are looking out for you, who are out there helping you. If you have one bad experience, you're going to have millions of people who will come to your support and nullify it. So you've seen examples of that in the Bikini article. If you log on to Twitter, you will see multiple examples on Simon and Ria's work. They're actually working with people who are sharing bad experiences. Not all of them are social media related, but you will see the amount of support those people are getting on social media. So that's something that's commendable. Okay, the last thing is that always share your story. That basically means that people are actually listening to you. They're reading what you write. They're looking up to you. If they're following you, that means they're actually interested in what you're doing. So share the good stuff that happens, and also share the bad stuff. Share your failures, share your regrets, share things that didn't work out, so that you can actually influence people to work harder, or work like one or two days ago, I was reading Lara Varpio's one of her posts on failure, and I was just thinking that she's so iconic with so many articles, and she's so eloquent and everything, and then you feel closer to that person when you realize that they've had these setbacks that you are facing, that this is just a part of the process, and then you learn from them that how they got over that, or what they're using, or so share whatever you think is helpful, whether that's something that went wrong, something that went right, some new tech that you are using. So do share and spread positivity as much as you can. So these are the things that I think factor as do's in development of professional identity. Would you like to say something to this, Johnny?
No, I think that's good guidance. I think we should move quickly on so we can get to questions and things.
Okay, sure. Okay, so these are the main don'ts, the things that you shouldn't be doing on social media. The first is try not to dispense medical advice. It's not ethical. It's not right. You're not looking at the patient in real life. You don't know the background, the underlying problems, particularly if you don't know the patient at all. You're not from the same area. Like there are websites actually, and there are Facebook pages and groups where, and particularly Johnny might be aware of this more than I am. There's a lot for dermatology where, people are putting up pictures of their acne and stuff and getting treated online. So that's just that's wrong. And if you're getting requests to actually treat someone online, so please try to deny that. That's just, it's not right. It's not legal. It's not good for the patient. It's not ethical. Apart from that, don't use social media for discouraging, shaming, or some personal vendetta against a particular group or against people. That stands against all the positive work that we are doing. So we want to develop professional identities instead of impeding them. So try not to go on with grudges or with shaming or discouraging a certain person or a certain group or a certain community. That doesn't work well for anybody, and it will actually hamper the whole movement in the long run. Also, always remember that social media is very helpful. It is very positive. It is one of the best things that you can use for learning, but it is never going to be a primary source of knowledge. It is not your go-to textbook. It is not your consultant. It is not something which will teach you how and why to practice medicine or how you can become a medical educationist. It will facilitate, but it can never be a primary source. So don't consider it as your first go-to when you want to find new literature or when you want to see latest information or when you want to see a treatment. You always have research articles for that. You have textbooks for that. You have your people for that. So use it wisely. Don't ever quote it as a primary knowledge source, because that is something which it is not. Okay, so I think we're moving on towards the end of the presentation. I have a special mention for Dr. Catherine Hennessy, who was kind enough to share her work on social media. I have put her in the references. Please do look her up. She was also kind enough to pilot my survey the first time. Dr. Minka Chan was very, very kind to share her ICRE 2020 slides on social media and how to be an active proponent of change. These are wonderful. It was work done by Lynn Sonberg, Dr. Simon Fleming, and Minka Chan. It was very, very lovely. And thank you very much for sharing those with me. And all the people who I have surveyed and interviewed over the subsequent past 2-3 months, thank you very, very much finally, I would love to thank ASME for giving me this opportunity. I am very grateful to Lee and Jenny, who have put up with me over the last few weeks, every now and then. And of course, to Johnny, who's been a wonderful colleague and who's been very encouraging and is just overall a very lovely person. So thank you, Johnny.
Very kind. Shall we do some questions? So there's a first of all, really interesting presentation, Kamal, and obviously lots of talking points. I'm sure people will have loads of questions. So please, guys, post all your questions that you can think of in the chat. The first one I was just going to address is one that's really interesting and it's a simple question, but it's hard. Is what's your opinion on the use of "views my own" in your bio? I know I've got an opinion on this, but I'd be really interested in yours, Kamal.
Sorry, can you repeat that?
Yeah. So what's your opinion on the use of "views my own" in the bios, in your bio? Like, let's see.
Yeah, that's a very interesting question. I think it's nice if people think that it's very if they can do that, because I'm not one of those people. So
I guess so. I look at it in kind of a risk management point of view. Because when I used to be very flippant about this and just say, look, I don't put "views my own" in my bio because who else's views are they going to be? But actually, that's the important point, because actually they could be other people's views, because let's say if you are running a social media account and you are just yourself, you don't represent any other organizations, and you don't have a position of responsibility, fine, do your thing. Yeah. But if you represent organizations, if you like, for example, I represent ASME, I represent British Journal of Dermatology, I represent Medicines, and if I post something ridiculously controversial, then that reflects badly in those organizations. So I have a responsibility.
Exactly. Yeah, that's right. I agree with that. I think "use my own" is one of those things that, because again, it's a collective platform. So usually the views are not really just your own. They're influenced by your culture, by your ethnicity, by your, backing, by if you're working in Leeds, the views might be of a collective hidden curriculum from your background. So it becomes tricky to say, "views my own." That's very, very, I think it's a very individualistic approach, and people who are like solely, if they can do that, they can have views which are just restricted to them. So I guess yes, but otherwise, most of us, we are working at places and we're representing different places. So yeah, it actually would contradict a lot of things we stand for.
Yeah, I guess it's a responsibility issue, and it doesn't really
exactly. It's more of a responsibility issue.
Yeah, and I think it brings us to another point made by Maya in the questions. They do think a separate social media account for professional use is better for the boundary blurring that we've been talking about, because it will reduce the reluctance to add a superior, for example, and flatten that hierarchy. So if you have your own professional account and then a social account.
Yeah, actually, I think, that's it's a good question. I think if you have a separate professional account, it doesn't mean that, you're not going to talk about anything else. So it's just something which will be more focused towards your profession and more focused on things which are you want to do professionally as compared to your social life. Like, for example, you might be posting, things that you're doing with your parents on your Instagram account, or with, your friends or stuff, and what you want to do in the weekend, what you wore, or outfit of the day and stuff like that people do. But you might just not be going to that extent on your professional account. Like, you might be sharing a nice picture of your house or your family or your cat or anything else, but you might want to make it more focused towards a certain thing. And I think that's something which automatically happens more on Twitter, because it's so restricted. It's just 140 characters. So usually you don't end up putting a lot of personal information there anyways.
Yeah, I guess it's personal, isn't it? Everyone's going to have their own.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Like, if someone follows me on Twitter, they know they're going to get some MedEd stuff, but they're also going to get me ranting about Man United as well. But I try to make my Instagram very just work, just posting about work, and I try not to post about my family or my cat or anything like that. It's just, but some people are all the way around. you can't. There's no. I don't think you can ever have guidance on this.
I think it's different for different medias, for different people.
Yeah.
And I think, you will always have a leaning towards, one place will be more personal than the other. So I think it's going to happen that way. But yeah, you have to show, what's important here is that you have to show a human side. Like, you can't just keep on posting about, what you did in medical education and nothing about as a person, because it will cause problems with the professional identity, I think. So you have to strike.
I think some people take a very extreme view of it and would say, look, I'm only going to have this account for my medical education activity. And I think that's fine if that's what works for you and if you have time for that. And you have the discipline for that. Because that's the ultimate, that's the safe way to do it. You're never going to get accused of, being unprofessional that way. But you're right, it does kind of confuse the professional identity a little bit. So the answer is there is no right answer on that. The only thing you shouldn't do.
It's always, it's a personal preference, I guess.
You definitely shouldn't set up an anonymous account because as hilarious as you are, the GMC say no.
Yeah, that's not right. I don't think that should not be done. No. Yeah.
Do we have any other questions from anybody in the chat? No. Oh, otherwise, I can ask it a few questions. I've always got a few. If I make a comment, keeping professional and personal accounts separate would be more helpful, and then maintaining norms of professional account with professional and humane behaviour would help. Okay. I mean, I guess that's Sadia, that's your preference, and that's great. I think it just comes down to your own institution, your own background, your own experience of social media, because it's such a unique take. And then one more question from Amaya. Do you think having students and teachers connect on social media helps to reduce the power gap between them? That's a good question.
Yes, that's a very good question. And yes, I think it totally does. Yes.
I think it's interesting because for let's say in the UK, we've got a lot of teaching fellows. Big phenomenon in the UK in terms of career-wise. So that for people who are based in the UK, these are junior doctors who are usually post-foundation. So they're usually in their mid to late 20s. And they are... they take on roles of teaching, so they do 50% or even 100% teaching. And they only have recently graduated themselves. For example, when one of my old flatmate and best mate, he was a teaching fellow, he was teaching his now fiance. And so I think when you get to this near peer level, or even peer teaching, that's where it gets really difficult with social media. You can't tell people you can't add people on Facebook at that point, because how, where do you draw the line?
Yeah, it's tricky, but I think, that's something which we can still do with like platforms. Like, I think Twitter is one of those where you can actually, get away with that, or even Slack. And with Facebook, what I did was I do use Facebook in my actual teaching for physiology. But it just takes a lot more effort because you have to create a separate group, and then you have to create moderators from between the students, and you have to have a little bit more privacy settings. But I think it does, in terms of the power gap, I think it totally does reduce it, because I think students, they see you as somebody who's also living and doing other stuff, rather than just coming and giving a lecture and then going away, or just coming and, doing a surgery and going off. So, because social media for them is now like eating and drinking, because, the Gen Z and the millennials and everybody after that, they're always on that. So I think, in terms of the power gap, it totally helps in reducing that. You're mute again, Johnny.
The whole basis behind you're hosting me, come on. The whole basis behind behind social media theory is hierarchy flattening, and by introducing that more kind of the friending on, or the following on social media, you are by definition you are acting on sometimes literally reducing that power gap. But some people don't like that. Some people aren't ready for that.
Yes, that I did tell you about that. It's cultural, and in our culture, there are a lot of conventional. Because it's a sign of respect to not speak too much in front of your elders. Be very very short and concise with them, and share very little. So there are some professions more than others, like some clinical rotations more than others, where there is a gap between the supervisor and the resident.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's very cultural. So I guess.
And we've got one more question from Alex. Hi, Alex. She said, with continual notifications on professional or semi-professional accounts, it can mean you never really switch off. Do you have any tips for managing this balance between work-life balance and social media?
Oh, that's a very hello, Alex. That's a wonderful question. Yes, it's specifically after COVID-19, and we shifted all the teaching online, so the notifications are endless. So I think the only thing that you can recommend is you have to do match scheduling, and you have to draw boundaries between the times when you're going to be there. So I guess if you can convey to your students that this is the times I'm available, they will still keep on badgering you, but it will, after some time, it will reduce. They'll stick to those times, knowing that you will respond in just that time. So it's going to take a lot of discipline and a lot of ignoring that platform for the rest of the day.
Yeah, I think it's difficult. Like, we are a generation where we're constantly online. Like, yeah. I would expect that when someone emails me or sends me a message about work, I will respond no matter what time, unless I'm asleep, no matter what time it is. But other people have different opinions. So, like, I know, in fact, I've seen this on Prof. Gabsvin's emails, and I think Megan Brown, who's in the chat as well, does the same.
Yeah.
And on emails having, my hours may not be the same as yours. So I may reply, I may not reply. which I think is a really good way to it's leveling the playing field there and saying, look, and accepting this new, dynamic that we've got. The other thing I would just add is about social media is set up to be addictive. That's the whole point.
Yes.
It can completely change you. If I would recommend any further reading or listening, I would recommend a podcast called Down the Rabbit Hole, I think it's by the New York Times, which is about how YouTube algorithms can convert people to become extremists. And because YouTube is a form of social media, potentially as well, depending on your definition. And it's designed to make you angry. And I think if you get sucked in and if you're not disciplined, I've been there myself, where you just find yourself just sat staring at a screen, getting more and more annoyed and more angry. And that kind of stuff can change people, and it can change countries. So just trying your best to be disciplined and use it for work, and use it for a little bit of social, and then stop using it.
Yeah, you have to have the discipline to stop. And that's very, very hard. So, but yeah, that's the thing, that you can't turn it off once it's there. So that's one of the things.
Yeah. So perhaps we should be teaching our students and perhaps more importantly, our colleagues, our educators, healthy social media practices, rather than just throwing badness and risk and danger at them, teaching them how to do it well and how to do it healthily. Exactly.
That's the need of the day, that we need to teach them, or we need to learn how to do it properly.
And that way you can maintain your best form of professional identity.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, Brain, I think that takes us up to our hour exactly. So not bad hosting in the end, apart from a few mute escapades.
No, I think it went
well. So thank you, first of all, to everybody's comments. I'm just seeing one last one from Laz about the GMC stance on social media. Made me terrified to use it at all. In practice, I think a lot of it is very difficult to enforce, Laz. So we can perhaps take that conversation off onto Twitter. So if anybody wants to continue the conversation and tweet us,
you're more than welcome. Yes,
please do
on Twitter. Yeah.
So thank you to everyone who has been asking us questions, both on here and on social media. And thank you to Jenny and Lee for facilitating, and thank you to Komal for your amazing talk. It was lovely.
Thank you so much, everyone. And if you have any questions, you can keep posting in the chat, and I will answer them later. I will reply through the ASME platform.
Thank you.
Thank you.